Okay. Hello. Welcome. I have the microphone closer. Hopefully, the audio sounds better this time for you. And have two questions lined up for tonight, or this moment. Before we go into them, just a moment of breathing. So, the first question. Hello, Ryan. Would it be possible for you to talk about grief? Thank you. Yes, it is possible. It is happening. Okay, grief. Grief is a big subject, quite important. To begin, something I find interesting that I've distinguished the difference in. Grief does feel like suffering in a lot of ways. It's painful, it's heavy, there's deep sadness. Sometimes other emotions come from that too, like the stages of grief was something somebody had made up that tends to be pretty accurate, like anger can happen or denial. But so one, just acknowledging that, yeah, grief in many ways is painful. It is a form of suffering. But it's not, I find it important to distinguish that it's not the same kind of suffering that happens from our just neurotic egoic mind. The suffering of my imagination running wild and just creating stress and anxiety for me or something. And a lot of the suffering that I focus on in awakening, it's really focusing on transcending the neurotic sufferings first. Then the deeper ones, like grief, I see as a little different, especially because there's love, is entangled in grieving. The more we love someone or a pet or something that's very close to us, when that form dies, it stings very deeply, and so how do we navigate grief? What is grief? Yeah, just first acknowledging that it's a different form of suffering. And in a way, I've come to find in my own grieving, there's a sort of preciousness to it. Like, I wouldn't, I don't mind getting out of the negative stuff, the deep sadness, the maybe sometimes like victim identity can get woken up with people with grief, people dying. Different egoic patterns can attach in the grief, but the grief itself is kind of a beautiful, precious thing. I've come to realize, and yeah, there's a lot in this. One of the most important things, both in grieving and in just our spiritual practice as a whole, is to be present, right? To be present right now, in this moment. And being present, we can notice our breathing. We can notice the sounds around us. Lovely way to be present. But then we also, the other layer of being present, listening to our thoughts that are happening in the mind, and also, just as important, listening to the feelings in the body. And so, if we all pause for a moment, check in, notice how you're feeling right now. It may be feelings of something lingering from earlier in the day. Maybe you have some grief that is, been a common visitor recently, hanging around a lot, or maybe you have grief that you hadn't really looked at in a long time, and suddenly we're talking about it, and then it just kind of wakes up, and that sadness shows up in the body. So just be present for a moment and notice what you're feeling, whatever it is you're feeling. And in this listening, this emotional listening, it's really a very gentle, caring, paying attention, and in a way of like, there's no wrong answer. Whatever is present is present. It's just a matter of bringing attention to whatever is happening inside. So this is really the fundamental piece of where we work with the grief, because it's not so much about, clearing all the conceptual stuff as it is just being very present in our body. And when the feelings of grief are happening in the body, then we honor this, and we just go deeply into it. Let ourselves feel it completely, which, if it's of a grieving nature, often, there's sadness. Tears can often happen. They're kind of releasing, letting ourselves fully feel and release. It's really important to keep, you could almost say, master this practice of emotional awareness and honoring of emotions. And what I've found in grieving, as far as the emotionally healing part goes, it comes in waves, and each wave is important to be honored. I have also found, in my own experience of grieving, what it tends to happen so far, at least with my grandmother died a couple of years ago. I was her caretaker for a couple of years, and two of my lovely dogs have passed in the last couple of years. In each of their deaths, in the moment after their death, there was some strong grieving, just a lot of sadness, just reality, just fully sitting with the reality that their body, their form is gone. It just is. It's what happened. And to fully accept that, it's heavy, it stings. There was sadness. I remember when I was digging, I buried both my dogs. When I was digging Zen's grave, it was actually very healing to dig, because I was digging, and at one point, it felt beautiful, and the next moment I'm crying. Next moment, there's just this lovely peace, this fluctuating of emotions, and just honoring all of it, whatever wants to show up. But what I find in bringing presence to grief is that it actually does heal pretty quickly. But the interesting thing is, like, I'm not even trying to rush healing it. It's sort of more of a feeling like, if the sadness is present, it's just, okay, sadness, I'll be here with you as long as it takes. Maybe it takes 20 years. No problem. Like, that's the kind of openness of it. It's like, there's no problem. However long it needs is how long it needs. And granted, I mean, not to, like, have competition of sorts, but there is something to be said about the closeness of a relationship, and, how deeply someone might grieve. Whether, someone losing a child, big grief. Losing a lifetime partner is big grief. There's these big ones. And, of course, losing a pet can be quite devastating too for many. So it's step one, and the most important step, is just continuously checking into the present moment and seeing. It's almost like kind of inquiring, is this a moment that requires healing, or is this a moment of enjoying? It's maybe kind of how I look when I check in. If it's a moment of healing, then it means that, okay, some suffering is showing up, and I need to bring my presence to it and kind of work with it in that way. But part of the gift of awakening and healing and leaning into suffering whenever we become aware of it, part of the whole point of that is healing actually does happen. And as healing happens and starts to accumulate, you also will find that you check in and you feel perfectly peaceful, just calm or spacious or still. And it's, in the grieving, especially deep grieving, it's important to honor both ends. Honor the moments that there is sadness. Of course, or any kind of fluctuating, kind of disruptive emotion, kind of maybe one way we describe it. But then in the moments where you feel peaceful or still or calm or all is well, if those moments are there, it's important to also enjoy those, rest in those, recharge in those moments. Now the mind, you got to be careful. The mind might even feel guilty, like, oh, I'm not supposed to be at peace because, I'm supposed to be sad because of this situation. And this is where we also want to kind of step away from the mind. This isn't so much inviting mind into any of it. It's just about presence and the feeling itself. And, the mind can take a back seat. Thank you, mind, but it's enough for now. And just giving more attention to the feelings themselves. What I've found in bringing presence into the heaviness of grief as well is there isn't a set time idea, but at some point it just kind of melts into a deep peace and a very almost elusive love, just because it's hard to grasp, it's hard to pinpoint or put words to. But there's this really sacred, loving quality in being present with the grief that I find happens. And so honoring it, and then also enjoying the moments where we kind of come up for air, you could say, and get out of the mind running around and just being present in the body. That's really most important. As from the spiritual point of views, when we look at grief, ultimately what is happening there is that our attachment to a form is being dissolved, challenged. If we're really attached, it feels like a tear, because as humans, we go about our lives and we unknowingly attach a little too strongly to the world of form. And whether it's attaching our own identity in the form world or attaching others to their form. And this is it is important to look at, and so we'll talk about it, but it's also got to be careful because these are kind of spiritual right answers, so to speak, but we have to be careful not to use them to bypass the emotions. The answers themselves are true and can help, and when you feel it deep inside, it's kind of the key, you could say, perspective to feeling the peace, even when we lose someone we deeply love, physically speaking. We have to be careful not to jump to these philosophical kind of spiritual truths, and kind of trying to go around the grief, around that kind of suffering. That's not the ticket. You're right. It's transcending is going through the sufferings. But at the same time as so number one, we have our grounding, honoring practice of whenever the grief shows up. And it could show up at any time. It could show up now, obviously, while we're talking about it. But you could just be grocery shopping, middle of the grocery store, and all of a sudden just something clicks. You see a brand of something, and it reminds you of the person that passed, or who knows, song plays on the radio. This is where just being present is vital, because you don't know when it's going to come back in, or it may come back in regularly. But you're just being present now in this sort of unknown space and welcoming whatever's showing up. So that's just number one, very important. And then number two is looking at the other side of the conceptual. And I've spent a lot of time now over these years looking at death. And it's always been a curious subject to me, even before spiritual awakening, and then after spiritual awakening, certainly. And then I started getting involved in a community group called Death Q&A, where a friend of mine and I co-host a space to talk about death, because it's just such a important subject, the world of impermanence that we find ourselves in. We're born into this world of forms, the bodies that age, and even seemingly very strong concrete elements are even impermanent, like the house and the metals and all the this microphone, right? It's just like metal. This microphone will probably outlive us. you know, the materials are much stronger than this body, but of course a lot of things end up in a landfill. Anyway, uh, so yeah, we live in this world of impermanence, right? And it's interesting is that throughout my life, early on, I noticed how death was always treated as such a like taboo thing. We didn't really talk about it much in my family or whatever. So I hadn't had many people die when I was young. There was like a step great grandmother or someone like of that nature that I went to her funeral, and I didn't understand what was going on really. It's pretty young. They did have an open casket, so I saw her, her form there, and but after that funeral happened, it was sort of like, okay, that's done. Like our society's like buttons it up, and then okay, moving on. That's kind of how the West certainly kind of treats death, and it just never seemed to be much of something people wanted to talk about. But it's just like, well, hold on a minute. I mean, what I love most in this whole universe are the people that I'm close to, my friends and family, right? And they are all subject to death eventually, because nobody's immortal in their physical body, right? I saw this at a young age, and I think most of us do, but maybe we sometimes shy away from it or whatever. But for me, it was just like this metaphor of, I kind of saw death as like this, we're all on this river, and we're just floating along the river, and there's this giant waterfall up ahead, and it leads into this abyss, and you have no idea where it goes. But we all know we're heading off that edge, off the cliff, the waterfall of life. It's coming for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a king or a peasant or anything in between. You're human, then you're on this waterfall, right? The impermanence of form. And so there was a lot of fear in looking at that when I was younger. But it was also sort of like, well, what other choice do I have? I mean, I guess I could ignore it, but then it's just going to hurt even more when it does happen. So there was just this willingness to, okay, even though I don't really want to look at death, like my loved ones passing away one day, and then of course looking at my own death is a really important thing for all of us to deeply look at, and to feel our own fear and grief around our own death. But as I realized, like, well, this is inevitable, so I guess the only thing I can really do is lean into it just to help prepare myself as best I can for if I happen to be alive before others die. And so that's kind of what the movement was. And in the looking at it more and more, a lot of emotions came up, a lot of fears, a lot of all kinds of stuff. Fast forward a number of years now, both in my own spiritual awakening and looking at hearing other people share about death and looking at it a lot myself, there's really a peace, because there's this deep, deep knowing in me that who we love is not really subject to this world of form. It never was to begin with, and that's kind of the main error we've fallen into. When we grieve death, it's actually, in a way, it's kind of a fierce teaching, but it's really shining a light on where we had fallen into an illusion in the first place. Not that the person was an illusion. No, the being we love is that's the very point. Is that we as beings beyond form are anything but illusion. That we are what is real, and what is immortal or eternal, timeless in our essence. But the form, the body, and which also includes the past is also a sort of form, because it falls into memory and all these experiences. And it's beautiful to appreciate the past, but to recognize we are not our past, and nor is anyone we know. They are not their past. Who are they? What are we then? Well, we're present moment. And we're not even these bodies. I mean, we temporarily get to enjoy these bodies. Some very temporary. I mean, some babies are born and pass away. A couple of days. They had a couple of days of life. Well, plus the months in the womb. But so humans, if you only look at humans, although you could look at all forms of life, but humans were just kind of being born, and we're alive for a little while, and then we die, and we're born. Eckhart uses it bubbles, like a bubble, and then pop, bubble pops, and this might almost sound a little callous or something, but it's a big view of how this is just how the play of form is. All these forms are born, and we go about our day and it's interesting though, from our own individual life form experience, let's say we live 80 years, it feels pretty long until you're 80 and you realize, whoa, that flew by. But in the midst of it, when you're a kid and then you're a teenager and you get your first job and then your first relationship and on and on and on, we go through all these things, it feels in some ways very slow and like drawn out and so on, which is interesting. But okay, 80 years goes by and then we pass away. Meanwhile, the Earth, which is 4.5 billion years, if you look at the age of the planet we are born on and live on, and pretty much our whole world is on this planet is like just almost incomprehensibly older than us as individual forms. And so from the view of form itself, we as our little forms of life are so immensely temporary. But when we're looking at it from the inside out, it feels very slow and drawn out. But, Eckhart makes a joke like, on the gravestone, most people when we pass on the gravestone, it just says, our name and then the date from born in 1947 and then died 2010, and their whole life is in that little that little line in between the dates is their whole life, but this is true for all of us. I mean, if you're listening to this right now, it means you're currently alive, which this is beautiful, and we can appreciate being alive too. That's one of the gifts of looking at death, actually. I find that it really sharpens or deepens my appreciation for being alive while I'm still here. And just kind of being more present, making sure to soak up every moment. Whenever I see family, it's just a habit. I always say goodbye to them as if it might be my last time I see them. It's not out of fear, it's just recognition. There's so much about this reality we can't control, and I don't know when it's my time to go or someone else's. And so there's a surrendering into that, looking at it, accepting it, and not fearing it. Just a piece of like being grateful each time I do get to see someone. Oh, there's my dog Ollie. I don't know if you guys can hear him. But so at the moment we're just looking at how we attach to form. We identify. I'm going to pause until Ollie is done. Okay. So yeah, we identify with form. This is actually one of the definitions of ego. Is we are actually consciousness. That's who we really are. We are consciousness. Everyone we know and love, everyone even we hate, all of it, it's all consciousness, and we are consciousness. But when consciousness, goes into a form, like let's say my body, and is born as Ryan, and then everybody's calling me Ryan, and then I go through school, and I go through all this experience and personality, and all this stuff kind of gets entangled. And I have this mental idea of myself and stories and even a name. And I've, no one told me that, oh, I'm not any of that, actually. I'm consciousness. No, the world doesn't, as humans, majority-wise, don't understand this yet. So I identify with all these forms. And so the consciousness, whenever it identifies with all these forms, that's his one definition of ego. And we start to see the suffering consequences of that, though, because if, let's say, I only know myself as this body, well, then death, for one, is a big problem. Because it's like, oh, well, what's going to happen to me when I die? I want to continue. Everyone wants to continue existing in some way or another and enjoying life. And so death and grieving really forces us to look at, like, deeply look at, who do we really believe ourselves to be, and who do we really believe everyone else is. And when we just know in our bones that the people we love, the animals we love, the whole world we love is of consciousness, which is what we are as well, and we can never be separated, really, actually. We can think we're separated, but we're not, actually, on the unseen level. When you feel that, then death, suddenly becomes a much, not such a problematic situation, both for ourselves and for those we love. Now, at the same time, I say this, but when death does happen with my, family or so on, I'm sure there will still be some sadness, and I have to honor that, and then, work with that sadness, be present with it, let myself feel it, pass through, and then there's peace again. So this is the kind of paradox, but with grief. There's the spiritual side of, yes, we are all essence. We're never really these bodies to begin with. That's the thing. So when the body dies, it's like, it's almost like a costume. We were given a costume. We tend to identify with the costume, and we identify other people with their costumes. And then one of us dies, and then, oh no, where'd they go? But really, they just took off their costume. Now, to be fair, though, the physical presence of them is nice, to be able to hug them or talk to them again, or these type of physical things. This is a physical form world. And that's where, we have to honor the sadness of missing that beauty, that preciousness. Now, you might also find in the missing of what you can't do with them anymore, though, also maybe looking at the appreciation of all the time you did have with them. And just really kind of resting or enjoying these moments. And this is where you could consciously go into the past and just appreciate all these lovely moments that we've had with somebody who's passed. That's a lovely way to honor their passing. But yeah, I mean, and another thing too for me with grieving is it can feel like, okay, let's say, for example, I'll just use an example. My dog Zen passed away last December, or this December. Wow, it's only been 5 months. Feels like a long time ago. But, so it's only been 4 or 5 months, right? And, right now I'm 35 years old. Let's say I live to be 85. So I have 50 more years in the human form. And it might seem like a long time from my perspective. Wow, 50 more years, that's pretty long. But then again, like I brought up earlier, time just flies. I know, in some strange way, that like one day, if I even make it to 85, I might watch this video and be like, wow, I look so young back then. Just like I do now when I look at my baby stuff or my teenage stuff. So, time flies, but the point here is, like, I feel like with my grandmother passing or Zen, it feels like I'm not that far behind them in a way. But not in a, like, pessimistic or any kind of negative way. It's just a sort of like, it's like, hey, I'll be seeing you soon kind of thing. I'll be seeing you in the formless, And there's just a knowing. Some people might think of it as like a belief, like I believe I'm going to see them again, but it's not that. It's just a deep feeling, just And I think that's love. Love is certainly immortal as well. So the love that we have for another being, another person or animal or so on, um, that's powerful, and it's the essence of spirituality. I mean, it's God, that love. How could that be threatened at all, even with the body dying? It's okay. So these are the two sides of how I look at and experience grief. There's the honoring of the emotion, but there's also the fact that these emotions are making us really investigate deeply on what do we really know about who we are and who everyone else is. And what I've found is the more that knowing has become unshakable, there's no doubt anymore, a lot of peace comes in with that knowing. And death is no longer such a big deal. Which is very freeing, especially, I mean, on one end there's the grieving of people that have now passed, but there's also a lot of times we have a lot of unconscious fear about the people, everyone else that's still alive, that we can't control their environments and all the situations and their bodies and stuff. And in some way, in the form level, we're all vulnerable to death, and there can be a lot of unconscious fear in dying or our loved ones dying, that when you look really deeply at it, though, and you find this transcendent knowing, like really knowing, not just mental, but a deep inner stillness feeling that, oh yeah, I am not this, none of us are these bodies. I am consciousness. I am life itself. Then fear and much of that heaviness of grief dissolves. But not necessarily all of the grief. That's the caveat there, the important note. Another thing about grief, too, I love someone, it's a rapper actually, he has a song, it says something like, everyone grieves differently. And I think that's true to a degree. How the grief manifests in us and through us can be different for each person. And the point of that is that there isn't necessarily one right way. It's still a very mysterious subject, even. I mean, if you try to Google grief, there's lots of people who, have ideas and how to honor it and hold space for others grieving and so on. But it's still kind of an elusive subject. Be very careful, though, with grief as well, with the ego can sneak in with a victim identity of, oh, this is so unfair. Why does this happen to me? And, that kind of thing. Because then it's like the ego is making it more personal, and that can really deepen. It can kind of blur the line between the sacred grief and the neurotic ego suffering. The neurotic ego suffering might want to sneak in there and feed on that sacred grief, you might call it. So just be careful of that, too. Something else with grief is, I've heard, and it makes sense, and I think I've experienced it in ways, to have some rituals that we can do to honor the person's passing. There's ones in the West that are pretty standard, like funerals or doing an obituary. Those are good to start off. But there can be, you can be creative about it. And especially early on in the grieving stages, different things can really reawaken the grief, like anniversary date of with the partner, or their death date, or birthday, holidays. There's all these different events and stuff, not to mention just the random grocery store ones with the song or whatever, right? But there's so many different things that will stir up the grief if it's there. And to have rituals to kind of help you sort of consciously act in a way that that honors them, and be creative with it. Just something that you think would make them smile, or even talking to them, because you are connected. It's inside, and just speaking in that stillness, feeling that they're right here with you in the moment, the present moment. just as you would be for them, right? If it happened to be us that were the ones that passed, or we'd suddenly be like, okay, see ya. No, we'd certainly hang around and watch out and care and patiently wait until they joined us. Not in a rush, no rush to die and join them, but all in its natural timing. With grief too, be very mindful though of the depressive state. Where the grief the ego sneaks in with the grief, and it creates that victim identity, but it could also create a numbness and like a depressive thing that would certainly be of suffering. We stop taking care of ourselves and so on. And the way out of that, support, having friends, family, even professional support, depending on how intense it might be. The group counseling can also be beautiful. Something I found as well with grieving, there's just something to be said about finding people that have had very similar grieving situations. Because when the pain's heavy, and let's say someone loses someone like they lose their child, right? And then someone else is like, oh, I feel so sorry for you. I just lost my dog the other day. And it's like, if the person just lost the child, that can kind of feel insensitive. Like, not comparing them, but, it's like, no, only a person who's also lost a child could understand someone who's lost a child, Although some people, I get, do feel their pets are their children, and I get and respect that. But, the point here is just that, hamster dying and a baby dying, kind of different things, if we're being real. And so speaking to finding people that have had very similar situations in that can help. That can also be actually a little bit tricky though, because it can also turn into a victim identity hangout session, where everyone's just kind of feeding on each other's pain. So you have to be careful with this too. It's interesting. The pain body, for example, loves pain. Pain is the pain body's food. And what a great source of food for the pain body, almost like overindulging in the suffering of death, if that makes sense. So just, I have to be careful with this too, self-observation, how much talking about it feels right and healthy and kind of releasing the pressure, but without, these other egoic aspects kind of latching on and feeding on the pain, which wouldn't be good. It would just prolong the pain, really. In this moment, if we can settle ourselves and connect to this sense of formlessness within ourselves right now, this is quite important for grieving and fear of death, because this formless space that we can tap into, that we can embody, it's free of all of this. It has been and always will be free of all of this form world stuff. And when you can when that awakens inside, there's just much peace, transcendence, liberation. I actually feel one day during Death Q&A, after doing it for a couple of years, it just really dawned on me how probably so much of the human insanity that we see on the news and all over the place really comes down to humans not knowing how to grieve. And the grief not being cared for, intended to, turns into a lot of ego and human insanity, I have a feeling. whether it's, gangs. These people are good friends in some ways, and then one of their friends gets killed by the enemy, and the pain of losing that friend is so intense. And then right behind that is the desire for vengeance, and so the ego, and then it justifies attacking the other side, the enemy, and it kills one of them on the other side, and then they experience the grief of their friend dying, and the anger and the retaliation, and then they go back, and vicious cycle back and forth, right? Just small example, but now wars, and even not even just killing each other, but like just violence of all kinds comes out in the pain. We're all, in a lot of ways, like you could actually say a lot of the unconscious humans are really just like humans with all these wounds, these exposed wounds that aren't being tended to, and they're infected and sensitive, and just the slightest touch and extreme pain, and also contagious on this energetic level. And so it's like all the sensitivity and the pain doesn't know how to handle it, and so all it does is create more pain out into the world. And I feel so much of that comes back to us humans as a whole just not really knowing how to grieve, how to honor grieving. Because grieving too, obviously it's when a loved one dies, but actually grieving can also take forms of like just changing jobs, or losing a job, or a relationship ending, or even my friend Tom, he's like 74, 75, but he has a great example. Like even when we graduate high school, there's a death in that experience of the high school that I didn't even think of until he said that. And I was like, oh wow, you're right. It is gone. It's in a way that experience has died, and I never thought to grieve such a thing, or that maybe some would need to grieve it. So there's all these changes we experience in life too that sometimes require that sort of care of grieving care. Again, not to the same extent as losing a loved one, a lifetime partner, or child, or so on, or even grandparent that we were really close to. But yeah, just recognizing as well that grief it's actually such a vast subject. Very important to look at, and to feel like we are grounded or knowledgeable enough to know what to do with our grief when it shows up, for as long as it shows up. There was an example too where Eckhart was like at a church or something, and he saw a funeral off in the distance, and he just started weeping. He didn't know the person, and he didn't even, I don't think he's mentioned having thoughts about his loved one dying or anything, but there was just, it sounds to me like grief arose in him, and he didn't go into any thought about it, and I think that's an important key, but he also let it flow. He didn't, oh, I'm enlightened, I don't feel grief, it's like, no, if the grief was there, he felt it completely, and it was able to kind of wash through him. And I'm sure after that cry, there was very profound peace again. And so this is, the grieving even before someone passes. There's grieving of recognizing that they are getting closer to their time of death, and ourselves as well. Aging, conscious aging, is actually really it's a path of grieving our form, kind of slowly dissolving, more and more closer to death, to the physical death of ourselves or of our loved ones and stuff. But it can be beautiful, conscious aging, and I guess you could say death too, and grieving can all be beautiful when presence can be brought into it. Another aspect about death, a quote from Eckhart: "The secret of life is to die before you die." The secret of life is to die before you die. And the way I experienced that was that my familiar identity fell away. My identification with Ryan, conceptually. I still, obviously my name's Ryan. It doesn't help for me to go around saying, no, I'm not Ryan anymore. You still got to play in the form world. But deeper down, I don't really identify with Ryan. And I don't identify with my past, all my past stuff. I see them and I appreciate them, but it's not who I am. And so this strong identification, this attachment I had to my past self and to my conceptual idea of myself, that died. And if I look back on it, it wasn't an instant death. It was kind of like a fluctuation. You could say awakening is this fluctuation of kind of the death process of the ego, actually. That attachment to the form world, to our physical form, and the attachment to the more the subtler layer of form world, which is thought and emotion, which actually the second question we'll go into. But when right consciousness gets attached and identified with all of this is where all the suffering happens. And when we realize that, oh, I'm not all of that, or I'm not this, I'm all of this, when that happens deep inside, not just through thought, but on a feeling level, that's to die before you die. So the ego dies before the body dies. And it's called the secret of life because when that happens, it's liberation, it's freedom. It's actually very peaceful. But I remember when I was going through that process, it didn't feel peaceful and enjoyable. It felt actually very scary, terrifying, painful at times. And that wasn't painful because the death itself wasn't the painful part. Actually, I think it was mostly painful because I didn't want to let go. That's what made it painful. If I could have surrendered from the beginning, it probably wouldn't have been very painful at all. But the fact that I kept holding on was what made it really hurt. You get dragged along, So, the secret for us is to die before we die, to find this sort of death space where we also feel very alive, though. But then, of course, that also means to recognize this in everyone else as well. That no one else we know is really their body or their past. They, too, are the timeless essence of consciousness. And yeah, when we know this very deeply, it really does dissolve a tremendous amount of fear that otherwise happens. And it helps a lot in the grieving. Because as we honor the grief, that's the truth we land back in. That's where the peace comes back in from just knowing this very deeply. But it's very tricky. This is not a thought knowing. It's a what's Eckhart call it? He calls it a non-conceptual knowing. It's like you hear it and you just know it. Just like when you know you love someone, you don't have to think it. You just know it. Like there's just love there. So it's that. Anything else around grief? I guess the only last thing here on grief is what I've come to really trust with life is that any suffering that shows up in me, I can use to deepen. And it kind of gives it more of a sacred purpose rather than just being pain. It's pain that I can learn from, heal, or even transmute from a negative into a positive. And this is ultimately what I feel about death and grieving. Grieving is one of the heaviest pains. But when we can bring presence into that, it has potential for very intense deepening into our own experience of presence and freedom, ultimately. So I hope that helps, and thank you for bringing up this very important subject. I'm sure I'll talk about grief a lot more over the years, if I'm even here. I mean, honestly, I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow, to be honest. And that's okay. I'm okay with this. I plan on being here, but I don't know. But yes, so very important. So thank you for this subject. For the second question, let's see. Graham here asks, in your most recent Q&A, you mentioned that thoughts are form. Are emotions form in the same way? My thoughts are that emotions become form when we get attached to them. Would be keen to know your thoughts on this. So basically, yeah, our emotions also form. Yes. Yes, emotions are also form. You could just leave it at that. Okay, class is over. you know, so thought is a more subtle form, right? Because you can't see the thoughts. If you were to be like, where are your thoughts? Like, we know it's in our brain, but even science now can't actually point to a thought. So it's a very ephemeral, elusive form. But technically, it's still a form, right? It's just a subtle form. Now, and then, so on that subtle form, similar to the subtle form of thought, is the subtle form of emotion. Now, interesting thing about emotion is the body's reaction to our thoughts, to our deep, deep thoughts. So they might not be thoughts like when you ask the question, I wonder what my next thought is going to be, and you listen inward. You might hear mind chatter, but it's also possible that you don't hear anything, but there actually is thought happening on a sort of deeper belief level that we can't hear, but it's there. It's like a belief like, oh, why has this always happened to me? It's a good egoic example of a belief, where it interprets everything as if it's happening like we're just magnets for bad luck or something. And that would be an example of like a deep embedded underlying thought. And the body reacts to that belief with emotions like doubt and fear and probably depression. That kind of, it reacts in these ways. So this was actually quite important realization along my journey, because I think it's The Power of Now, Eckhart talks about how emotions are the body's reactions to thoughts. And for so long I was focusing on just thought observation, getting out of thought, which was lovely. But what was interesting was, as I was doing that, I wasn't fully aware of my emotions. So conceptually, I was like, oh, I feel so much better, bliss and peace, because I have no thought. This is lovely. But then interestingly, on the body level, on the feeling level, there was still anger and stress and anxiety and impatience and all this emotion that I was ignoring or suppressing and bypassing. So that second layer of awareness to look at the emotional body became where the work was. And it really helped me to really like get into the practice more deeply, more embodied. Because, feeling blissful on one end, but then in the body there's suffering, it's like, that's not enlightenment. If the body's still suffering, then there's still suffering. So, and also emotion, the way Eckhart defines it is the word, I forget the etymology, but you can look up the etymology of the word emotion, And I think it derives from like emotive, which means to feel disturbed. So it's important. He distinguishes emotion is the disturbance feelings, the feelings of suffering, sadness, fear, anger, jealousy, all that jazz. Whereas love, joy, peace, these are not emotions. You could maybe say they're experiential feelings, but they're not disruptions. So it's important, because I remember when I was younger, I used to put all of that in one box as emotion, but technically that's not true. All the lovely qualities of feelings are actually attributes of the awakened state, the enlightened state, which is not of emotion. It's of just that deeper nature. He also points out that it's to be emotionless does not mean necessarily being dead inside, or numb or turned off. To be in a transcendent space is to feel very alive and present, but also not have emotion. So it's not that anything's being suppressed or ignored or bypassed, but everything is like just able to come through, and it doesn't get stuck, and it gets processed very quickly and smoothly. And then you feel more spacious, transparent, and all the lovely qualities that people tend to seek. Oh, one moment, my computer's gonna die. To charge it. So, yeah, the emotions. Oh, another lovely thing about emotions are more honest than the mind. So, this is where, like, as for example, as being a male conditioned to suppress emotions and stuff, earlier on I would think like, oh, I feel so peaceful, so blissful right now. I'm awakened in this moment. How lovely, kind of thing. But I didn't realize, like, when I would drive, that I'd get all tense, and anger, stress would fill the body, and I didn't realize how much I was still suffering in my body. And so I started bringing awareness to it, and then realizing, oh, I have still a lot of work to do in integration, which is good. If you notice that you have work to do, this is good, because now you see your curriculum. You see what you got to work with, and you just work with it. But so, yeah, and I guess technically both thought and emotion, they are forms whether we identify with them or not. The subtle forms, but they are sort of subtle forms. Whether we identify with them or not, they're subtle forms that are just they're just in the possibility realms. But when we identify with it, with a thought or an emotion, that's when it gets a lot of power, and the consciousness gets really like lodged, or limited. Actually, consciousness gets really limited when it identifies with a subtle form, with any form, but certainly certain thoughts and emotions. So when consciousness identifies with who we are, the presence identifies strongly with a thought or an emotion, you could say the form strengthens even more. Whereas when the presence is very strong, then a thought or an emotion can arise in a being, in a person. But when the presence is stronger than the pool of that thought or emotion, then it's sort of just like a little wispy cloud that just comes and goes, doesn't stick, doesn't turn into anything, just whoop, gone. So that was you could say that form is pretty transparent, right? But when we get attached to it, then it gets really solid, a very real feeling, and very heavy, and all that stuff. So it's important to honor emotions when they're present, just like grieving. something I found interesting in my awakening journey as well was some of these emotions that I had, that I was identified with, I didn't really want to heal them. Part of me did. Part of me wanted to be free from that suffering, but another part of me didn't want to let go of that identity. It would rather know itself as being something negative than not know itself at all. It's one way you define the ego, actually. But the fear of not knowing who I am was stronger than the pain of thinking I knew who I was through these different thought and emotional forms. That's interesting to note. Along with the fact that if it's sort of like, if I heal this, who will I be? What will be left of me? If I heal all this stuff, then yeah, who will I be? And gratefully, there is a very beautiful and profound answer waiting that question. But from the ego's perspective, it's very scary, painful, or whatever. Fortunately, we're not the ego, so we can let the ego go. Let the ego go. That's a nice little rhythm. Something interesting that came up during a death Q&A with my friend Tom. He had this like graph, and it was a hourglass, and at the top of the hourglass were some grains of sand, and going through and then dropping to the bottom, and the bottom was quite full of these grains, and the top had just I don't know, a couple hundred or something, very small in proportion. Each grain of sand represented like 1 million people or something like that. And what it was showing were the people that were currently alive were at the top of the hourglass. The ones that were dying within the last couple days, where you could say were passing through. And then the ones at the bottom collecting were every human that has ever lived on this planet and already died. And when you stop and think about that, it's wow, a lot. I guess I could look up the number, but there's proportion-wise, most people who have ever existed have already died. And the ones who are currently alive right now, you and me, and the other 8 billion, we're actually a very small percentage. And give it 100 years, everyone now, well, poof, we will be gone. We'll be at the bottom of the time sundial, or the whatever that time dial, right? And then our offspring or other people's offspring will keep going. as long as the planet, allows us, we don't destroy the planet, right? Then humans will just keep growing and birthing and going through experiences of life and having all these relationships and attachments, and then the whole human experience, which includes the grieving, is part of the human experience. Interestingly, and there's spiritual ideas too, that deep down we know we're timeless, eternal beings, but we purposefully forget this so that we can have the full human experience in believing that we're not eternal, right? Because there is something about living in what seems to be an impermanent world, and that we as impermanent beings, it creates this sort of edge, this sharpness, this intensity to the experience. Whereas if we knew we're immortal beings, it would just change things a bit, And of course, one of the ideas of awakening is remembering what we forgot, whether we forgot on purpose or just part of the nature of how this whole existence works. One way or another, we seem to have forgotten that we are immortal, but not physically. That's the catch. Not physically immortal. But just there's something about that really big view too of how life, and that's only with humans, that dial image, Then you consider all the other forms of life, the plants and animals and insects, other species, the dinosaurs. There have been over like 5 massive extinctions where 99% of life was wiped out completely, and those species just went extinct, no longer existing. Whole species. That's big death, And this has been happening for millions of years. Birth forms, born, experience, and go. Born, experience, and go. And I don't know, there's just something very far out and expansive and beautiful, though, when we see that we are part of this. It's perfectly natural. It'd be more concerning if we weren't dying, maybe. Like, wait, what's wrong here? This isn't nature. Though I get, at the same time, when I think about my loved ones and my pets, there's this part of us that wishes their form could just live forever. Wouldn't that be nice? But that would have its own complications too. Not to mention, the planet can't just sustain 8 billion immortal people that keep having more children. That doesn't work. Not in the form realm. So it's almost like I feel like this whole birth and death is just like us taking turns, to experience experience the form life, and then we go back into the formless space where all is well. Okay, one more thing to end on. The Course in Miracles has a really powerful statement. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. So, nothing real can be threatened. Our bodies can be threatened. So, just from this point of view, our bodies must not be completely real then. Nothing unreal exists. That's pretty far out. So if our bodies aren't real because they can be threatened, then it also doesn't exist because it's not real. This is where you could get lost a bit in the spiritual ideas, but there is profound peace in it, because the last line says, herein lies the peace of God. There's often that question, like, how can God allow all this crazy stuff to happen on the planet? All this death and insanity. of humans, hurting each other and so on. And so this view points at, well, nothing real can be threatened. All the beings that are going through all these crazy experiences, who they really are, cannot be touched, hurt, or threatened. That's that immortal essence, the timeless being that we all really are. Consciousness is self. It cannot be hurt. And nothing unreal exists. All this crazy stuff happening is more like nightmares, dreams, right? And then you wake up from a dream and you're like, oh, thank goodness that wasn't real. Well, that was just a dream, right? And from our soul level, that's what this life is like too. We go through this life and we die physically, the body dies, and probably what our reaction is, oh, wow, that felt so real. What a crazy dream. Now, I can't say I know exactly how the afterlife works. There are certain feelings, though, like anyone we love, that love is very powerful and easily transcends the whole death situation, or experience or transition. Dropping of the body is actually one way I've heard it. It's a nice way to put it. Just dropping the body. Still here. But so God, you could say, in a way, presence just witnesses all this experience happening, both humans and all other forms of life. And there's peace underneath it all, because the truth knows that nothing real can be threatened. And even death ultimately does not threaten anything that's real. It's very, very profound. That statement has helped me a lot over the years, especially with fear. But it could also be powerful for grieving. So thank you for the subject, the two questions or two subjects. Very important. I wish you the best in your grieving. May you heal nice and slowly. No rush, no urgency. Take as long as you need. It's fine. Also, anyone watching this, if you really feel stuck in grief, you can always feel free to reach out. Be happy to meet one-on-one and chat about, hold space or chat. That might be helpful at times too.